I think it's a useful sort of framing of the market. I think we're at this defining moment of Web3, where no one really knows what Web3 means or what it is. So we're negotiating it out in public. And I guess that's the kind of thing we'll be doing today. So I think we can use this as a sort of route into discussing what Web3 is and how it's different to Web2. I think it also taps into this kind of like generational divide thing, which is quite interesting. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll share my screen whenever you're ready, Matt, and so everyone can see the article. Let me share my screen then. Oh, really? So you're warmed up.
Actually, the weird thing is, if you think about it as ageist, right? But when you start thinking about it as when you think about it as a state of mind, you can have a boomer millennial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone
actually,
called me a boomer on Twitter yesterday.
Yeah.
I'll just put it in the general chat.
My great grandmother was like the least boomer person I know, and she was born like ages ago. She's dead now, so it's certainly a state of mind, right? But we could have an official. Yeah, sorry, we could have an official thing on Twitter saying, actually, we don't think boomer is about age. So, in case people are offended.
So I got accused of being a boomer for hating the word tokenomics. And I said, no, I hate this word. It's token economics. And then some guy went, okay, boomer.
Yeah, but you can have a bell curve. So there's like a boomer who hates tokenomics, and then there is someone who's a galaxy brain who hates the term as well.
Yeah, I hate it because I think tokenomics is a thing. It's just Ian Beliner used to do with spreadsheets. You know what I mean? It's like the colorful pie chart you get at the end of a 2017 ICO. That's tokenomics. Token economics is a science.
Is he the black guy?
Ian Beliner, yeah, he's still around in this cycle. My mate sent me a picture of Ian Beliner on stage with like Major Lazer at some conference last week in Miami. Yeah, so Ian Beliner was a dude who made an insane amount of money running ICO pump and dumps, or not running them, but like just profiting off them. It was he was like the influencer in 2017. There's loads of them now. But it was basically, if you wanted to pump your ICO, you had to hire Ian Beliner, and he'd charge you a huge amount of money and you'd give him a load of tokens. And what he would do is have these spreadsheets of talking about token supplies. And in a weird way, he was one of the first token economic guys, because like hardly anyone understood anything about it. So at least he had a go at it. But what he would do is just dump on all his followers relentlessly. And the absolute first start of the bear market was Ian Beliner made a song. I'm going to show you this. YouTube. Oh, it's called Moon Lambo. Beliner. Yes.
Enough said.
Do you hear this? Adverts.
Yeah, tokenomics totally has a ring to it of 2017.
Yeah. So can't hear it. You'll have to take my word for it. Check it out on YouTube. Moon Lambo. So 5th of June 2018 was literally the day of the start of the bear market. It was like when Ian Beliner posted Moon Lambo on YouTube, it was all over. So yeah, watch out for that one for a top signal. All right, so let's dive into this article. I'm not going to read it out, but what we'll do is take it in sections and pick out the salient points and see if we agree with it or whatever. But like I say, there's a lot to agree with in this. I think this point here is really important. Is too much innovation dangerous? So what I think we're certainly seeing the effects of. So I think, for one, let's say that, okay, boomer's not an age thing, right? You can be a boomer and be 21. I would like the kind of anti-NFT crew who are, NFTs are boiling the ocean, and this is just all a Ponzi scheme, blah, blah, blah. That's totally boomer behavior in my book. And I think one of the archetypes of boomer behavior is being scared about change driven by technology. So there's a few things happening there's fundamental, and this happens with disruptive innovation. So disruptive innovation is where it basically, this new thing is an emerging technology. It's clunky and bad and doesn't really work. But essentially what happens is exponentially travels up the, let's see if I can find the emerging technology curve. There's a specific chart I'm looking for. This is all the Gartner hype cycle, where basically there's something that's like new, doesn't really work that much yet, and then all of a sudden this disruption of this one, right? So you've got, I think we're about here in crypto. We were like way down here for like the last few years, but let's say you've got, this is like the mainstream market, high-end market. So there was a guy, so a good example of this is digital cameras. So the guy who invented digital cameras, I think he was called Steve Sasson. Yeah, so this dude, he invented the first digital camera, right? This is what it looked like. And it was awful. It looked like 10 pixels on a screen. But this guy invented the digital camera at Kodak. He was a Kodak engineer. And so Kodak made camera film. And they basically told Steve, stop what you're doing right now. We don't like this. And Kodak closed. The Kodak was completely finished by the digital camera because digital cameras took over. They disrupted the market. So digital cameras did this, and now we're in this phase of digital cameras where it's integrated into smartphones, and it's basically the de facto norm. But down here, they were like 10 pixel monstrosities, but you could see it coming. And Kodak were the boomers in that story because they were like, no, we don't like digital. Stop what you're doing, Steve. And they actually invented their own demise within their company. So were digital cameras inevitable? Was it, you can say, that's too much innovation, Steve. Stop making digital cameras. But it doesn't stop digital cameras from emerging. It happens anyway. They buried it inside Kodak, but it still finished them. So I think there's a kind of inevitability that comes with technological convergence, which means that this is happening whether you like it or not. And I still think we're about to hit a kind of real moral panic when it comes to Web3 and crypto, when people realize it cannot be stopped. Like there was nothing about digital cameras that was unstoppable, if you like. It was inevitable in the sense that, all right, we're going to start using CCD chips instead of chemical-based films. When it comes to crypto, Bitcoin cannot be stopped. Nation states cannot shut it down. It's impossible to stop. And that is triggering people's like visceral emotions when it comes to this stuff. And certainly with policy level stuff. So I thought this tweet was interesting, which is a kind of, do these people, I'm thinking Janet Yellen should be in this. We have a political class. This is more the case in America than it even is in the UK, actually. It's like the politicians are not a huge amount older than me. But in America, we've got Biden and Janet Yellen and these characters who are ancient, like 80 years old. And are they even capable of understanding? I don't know. What's your thought on that? Is there actually an age divide? So yeah, boomers are not racist, ageist term. And I can see why Naomi doesn't like it because of that. But do we think there is an association between age and technology acceptance?
No, it's just like in the US, I think old people who ended up in power, it's like people are high on power. So I think it's like, again, like a lot of people here probably have like super cool or had super cool grandparents who are just like, I don't know, doing crazy stuff in the 60s or something like this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can imagine my great grandmother completely getting it because she went through like a failed state during the war and stuff like this.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say, so there's this story, and I'm not going to say if this is 100% true, but I think it's pretty close to true, that when in Australia, when the British, not just the British, but basically the foreigners arrived on the boats, the indigenous tribes went down to the shore to watch them come in, and they couldn't see the boats because the technology was so far out of frame for them, they couldn't understand what they were seeing.
Yes, they couldn't parse it. They're like their brains couldn't compute what's this thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of that. I'm not saying that's completely what's going on, but I think there is part of that where technology has been democratized so much now. It's gone from this really top-down thing where innovation sort of always happened at some like layer well above the average person to like a point now where anybody can launch a token and create a market and do all these things. That's so far out of frame for most of these people. That's just like danger signs for them all over it.
So there's a couple of concepts I want to throw at you at this point. What you're just talking about there is sometimes called the theory of bounded rationality. And no, there's no pictures. So the theory of bounded rationality means that, so you can make a rational choice about something if you understand it. If there is, so necessarily the things that you can reason about have to fall within what you understand, within your frame of mind, within your perception. So you can't understand what a boat is if you've never understood the concept of seafaring travel, right? It's like, how are these people on water? So this is a really common thing inside. It's an economic idea, it's a social science idea, but it's like, why don't people get stuff? Why don't people understand why this is happening? And it's because they don't have the cognitive tools to be able to understand it, because it's outside of their bounds of rationality. So much of crypto is outside of the bounds of rationality. Like, no one understands it because it's like they don't have the building blocks to be able to make sense of it. So yeah, what you're talking about there is this kind of boats phenomenon was like, it's outside of the bounds of rationality for those people. And so much of crypto is outside of the bounds of rationality.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I'm thinking it could be a bit of a dangerous assumption, because some people will just assume that boomers don't get it, right? But I'm pretty sure that there are people in power who might not get the technology, but they completely understand what it means. That means it means the end of them, because it's like a technology of freedom, so they get that.
They get enough of it to know that it's a threat,
It's
which
a
I think
threat,
there's like,
yes.
So it just means that, the bounded rationality idea is like, I can't understand this, therefore it's bad. I think there's a lot of that, which is like this, or I understand it enough to know that it's bad because it's a threat to me. There's a correlated concept. This is another theoretical model. It's called the technology acceptance model, aka the TAM model. This is a lot of the basis of understanding technology adoption. And you can roughly bucket whether people will accept a technology into their life. And by acceptance, it means that you essentially integrate it into your daily practice.
But remember what happened to the Greek guy who brought humans fire? Like, he ended up like really, really fucked by the gods, right?
Yeah, this is it. It's not everyone likes this change. Disruptive innovation and necessarily ends previous regimes. Just like the digital camera ended Kodak, cryptocurrency will end traditional finance. It's not like they will work synergistically. It's that it ends them. A new regime, a new paradigm happens. It's like there'll be people who still use, like there's still people who use film cameras. It's just, it'll be around there, but that becomes the niche rather than that, right?
So we're heading towards, and just in a sort of economic sense, not in like a literal the original meaning of the word, but for economics, there's a new kid on the block that's going to take down the existing system, and there's this like, war basically.
It can create conflict. Yeah, so there's what you get is a clash of paradigms, and necessarily these things create conflicts. Now, conflict isn't necessarily always bad. So if you have two different ideas in your head, and from a learning theory perspective, those ideas are in conflict. What you have to do is create a new idea that either incorporates both of them, or you reject one of them and adopt a new one. But yeah, I think there is necessarily a kind of element of conflict to this. So this TAM model, people will look at a technology and say, is it useful to me? Does it do something that I can't currently do? Does it enable me to do something? And the other is perceived ease of use. Can I use this? Is it something that I can use? Is it something that I am able to use? So this is sometimes called perceived value, or the perceived ease of use. Crypto suffers terribly on this one, perceived ease of use, because it's damn complicated. It's weird. It's outside of people's bounds of rationality. I don't get what this is. It's too weird and different for me. But because in crypto, this is actually super high because number go up. So your perceived value is, if I buy this, it's going to make me rich. So it's crypto's super high on this side, but super low on this side. So this is getting better. There's user experience is improving, and it used to be the case, and Ksenia will remember this, that in order to handle Bitcoin, you have to download, like the wallets were just like, really, did you use Electrum, Ksenia, or one of those super early wallets? And one of them had to compile from code. I think the first Bitcoin wallet that I had is compile it directly from the code. It's got a lot better, but there's still a lot to be done. And in combination, these two things affect your attitude towards using it, what you intend to use it for, and then you end up with like how people actually use it. So you can make a technology with the express purpose of doing X, but the way people actually use it is Y. So you can end up with people saying, "Oh, we built this for peer-to-peer value exchange," but what we end up with is 1,000 rug pulls a day. There's like people, when given tools, do funny stuff with it. So there's another sort of dimension to this, which is like uncertainty, which as the older you are, the less uncertainty you like. This is like classic behavioral science. You are more likely to accept uncertainty as a young person than you are as an old person. So yeah, there's some fundamental sort of tools for us to think about this. So yeah, is there anything from this sort of bit that people want to flag? Boomers in the information revolution.
I suppose it's like you said, that risk piece is like people politically tend to become more conservative the older they get, and conservative. The nature of being conservative is to conserve the existing system because it will work for you. Whereas so it's like this.
Keep it the same.
Yeah.
But there is also an ego aspect to it. If you're old, and I know plenty of like old people who just have their egos in check, and they say, "Okay, I don't get it, but you're the new generation, you get it." So that's someone who I wouldn't call boomer. I'm representing old, like cool old people here, because even you might become more conservative. Like you want to go to the park like every time at the same time and have some structure in your life. But if your ego is in check by the time you're old, you're no longer super anal about it. These guys we're talking about, the boomers we're talking about, it's people with like serious ego issues who just want to control everything.
I was right. This is the right way of doing things. This isn't right. It is a very ego-driven thing because it means that you think your frame of reference on the world is the correct one, and everyone who does something else is wrong. So I think there's like some fundamental psychology involved in this as well, and there is a demonstrable empirical fact that people become more conservative with older age. So there is an age link, but yeah, absolutely, there are old people who are very progressive in their worldviews and are very happy for young people to come and change the world. So yeah, I think this idea that there's an established power structure. So I like to look at things through the lens of power. And there is necessarily a power structure is power allows you to get things done. So power is your ability to do things. The more powerful you are, the more things you can do. And consequently, if you're very rich, you're very powerful. And you don't necessarily, and people protect power because if your power lowers, you can do less than you used to be able. So you don't like new change coming in because it changes your ability to do what you want to do, which no one likes. So yeah, I think this sort of section's about what sort of Web 2, what is Web 1, 2, and 3. So just a high level, what I perceive the differences are. The Web 1 era was like basically static websites, and it essentially democratized information in the same way that the printing press democratized information. Now, anyone with a computer could publish a website and become a publisher. And you could set up a website and blogs were part of this. Blogging was one of the Web 1 sort of era thing. And essentially, it used the rails of the internet to open source information in a sort of radically new way. Web 2, it became the functionality of the websites became interactive. So it was still like one-to-many is one of the ways to look at it. So one-to-many communication classically was things like, let's say, TV and radio. So there's one person on the radio talking to a million people. There's one person on the TV talking to a million people. Web 2 changed that. It allowed a million people to talk to a million people. And this was a huge revelation. So it was hugely groundbreaking because it created a platform where people could talk to people without necessarily having to build their own website. The websites themselves became editable. And now everyone can genuinely be a publisher because you can interact with a website that allows you to publish your thoughts and ideas. WordPress is a Web 2 era phenomenon. You didn't need to be able to know how to code a website to set up a blog now. You can just use these templates.
There was a weird thing about it because actually a lot of people chatted on IRC before that, and there was many to many, and like discovered the internet through chat rooms. So it's also, I don't know, I don't really buy entirely this this paradigm of Web 1, Web 2. It's a normie thing, right? Because like
people
I
like
actually
boxes.
spend more time. Yeah. I spend more time in chat rooms talking to complete strangers before I went to websites.
Yeah,
because it was
and
more
I was
exciting.
using IRC and news groups pre-Web 2 era. I would say I was one of the very early Web 1 era people. I was using the internet in the early 90s. But what Web 2 became, this is where it ended up. It wasn't so much the Web 2 era was run by corporations, it's that the Web 2 era created an internet that was run by corporations. So it is a kind of, and fundamentally this disrupted what was the kind of really boomer era. The classic one being newspapers controlled the world, and then Web 1 started to disrupt, and newspapers died because they lost their control of the information. So this is where it's going out with the information era. But Web 2 became this platform aggregation phenomenon. So the first web, you actually used to surf the web, you used to call it. You just basically go and I'm going to look at this website, and I'm going to look at that website, and I'm going to look at this website. And Google ended up as the kind of route to these different websites, but you were still venturing out across the Web 2 ended up as a platform aggregation phenomenon where everyone gets all their information from Facebook or from Twitter. So it was a huge centralizing phenomenon where the information that was distributed across a billion websites ended up all centralized through a handful of websites run by corporations. So what I see Web 3 as is almost a re-decentralizing of the Web 1 was actually largely decentralized. I ran a website from a computer in my bedroom when I was a kid. It wasn't AWS. It was like anyone could and still can, but it just doesn't really happen anymore. The information is centralized around corporations. But what Web 3 does, it has blockchains as a base layer. And what that means is that individuality can come into the internet again. Instead of this being like this huge content aggregation thing, we now have an address. Like, so my ENS domain, so my .NIT.eth ENS domain is both a wallet and it can be a venue to serve a website from. So if you can go to .NIT.f.link, you can go to my website, which is actually a address, which is served from IPFS and identified by a blockchain-based address. So people aren't really getting their heads around this yet, but what it means is that instead of information being aggregated and controlled by centralized platforms, the internet experience can be individualized, where because you've got an NFT in your wallet, you have a bespoke internet experience. You can go to a website and see a website experience that's unique to you. And you can almost have a very personalized internet experience because of it.
It could be almost like augmented reality of the web, if you think about it.
Yeah, the web is augmented to your identity. So if you imagine a Web3 Twitter, instead of Twitter deciding what your feed is, you decide what your feed is. And the feed is specific to you. And your feed is specific to you on Twitter, but because Twitter decide what it is, you have no agency, no power over what's in your feed, apart from
Like
who you follow.
sorry about that.
So again,
Can't that be like a scary thing because everyone's like whole perception would be like special to them, like to their own and everything like that.
yes. I think, is that scary? Potentially. I mean, at the moment, everyone's perception is created by the platform aggregators.
Yeah, and what they collect about you. So you're always shown what they want you to see, and you have absolutely almost no
Yes.
power. It's so hard to even set up stuff without leaking any information, and they're gonna feed you what they want you, like quote unquote, they want you to see, being it Facebook or whoever pays Facebook, or you don't even have to go on Facebook to see their shit because they track you.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry, mate.
Sorry about that. That makes it like impossible to like get the truth and everything, like the actual like real truth where everyone could actually see. I think like later in the future, like truth is gonna be like one of the hardest things to find and to be like very common with, as everyone's getting their own like different types of like information and everything.
Yes. Truth is already difficult to find. If in fact, it's become almost impossible. And truth is determined by the medium. So, is it Goebbels that said this? If you control the medium, you control the message. And that it's basically that if you own the medium through which people collect the information, you control reality. And people's reality is controlled by Twitter. So is it dangerous that everyone has an individual reality? Is it dangerous for everyone to think for themselves? Yes, probably, for people who want to control the message. But yeah, what it means is ultimately is that it's possible for everyone to have divergent views of reality. Yeah. So I'm interested to think, why did you think that was dangerous? What felt like a risk to you on that?
Hello.
Hey.
Nice to be here and listen to this conversation.
Are you
I
asking
want
me?
to agree with the former view. Has anybody seen Reddit? How it has become from people trying to select their own views? They, due to power dynamics, they also submit to a narrative they think they choose for themselves, don't they?
Yeah, so I used to be a heavy Reddit user and got cut. I think there's a weird form of groupthink on Reddit that's emerged, and people do self-select their own little echo chambers on there. Yeah, I think there's the potential for people to find little clusters of things that they agree with. So what you can end up with is, Adam Curtis calls it hypernormalization, which is this idea that you create your reality that you're most happy with. So you're like, I don't like this idea, so I'm going to get rid of that idea out of my world and only talk to these people who have the same idea as me.
This is
Well, you're breaking up a little bit there, Ulysses.
about commenting boomers. And maybe we end up becoming another set of boomers by choosing only our own reality without any other type of thinking along with choosing it. Isn't this a danger?
It is a danger. And this is one of the things that why we're working on consensus technology. So I'm very interested in quadratic voting as a sense-making tool. So we can reach consensus as a group and see everyone's individual preferences. So we're running a vote at the moment on how we should construct our airdrop. And you can see in that vote some radically different perceptions, but are collected all in one place. Everyone has the ability to have their own perception, but what you get is an aggregate consensus that is truly disintermediated. There's no platform in the middle of that. We can't stop anyone from presenting their opinion. All opinions are fair and equal in Web3 world, and that's not necessarily the case in Web2 world. But I take your point. It's entirely possible for people to be essentially hyper normalize themselves into micro echo chambers and completely lose the plot because they're only listening to each other. But that's already happening, like you say, in Reddit and Twitter. But yeah, Bob, you said that, why do you think it's potentially dangerous if everyone has their own individual internet, if you like? I don't think. Can you hear me, Secret Bob?
I can't hear him.
Yeah, maybe he's
Sorry about
talking.
that.
Oh, yeah.
I was lagging for a bit. What
Yeah.
was the question?
The question was, what did you think is the danger of everyone having their own individual internet?
I believe that like the danger of everyone having their own individual internet comes from there'd be like no standard for everybody. Everyone has their own access to information, has their own like beliefs. If you see two people going out right now to argue or to go against their own perception, it's gonna be like a war because of this person believes that, hey, I have the right perception, and the other person believes, hey, I have the right perception. And like we're already seeing like in modern day times as two people with like different beliefs. Like example, look at the American politics, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. You're seeing a lot of people like hating on like Donald Trump and hating on, and like
Yeah.
they have beliefs from like information that's not like valid or anything, and that could
Yeah.
cause
That's the
just like
case. That's
fights
the
and
case
like
for like
yeah.
thousands of years, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I believe that like now in today's like society, it's becoming more common and like more of a bigger threat because of all this like new exponential, all this new like technology that we have and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like people
I think,
didn't know about each other's opinions before. They just didn't know and they didn't care. And now all of a
Yeah,
sudden we have a glimpse of it. And in our camp, the opposite camp always looks so wrong. So we start like hating. So there is this
yeah,
kind
and I
of
think like
culture of hating a different camp.
back then, correct me if I'm wrong too. Back then, there was more of a hierarchy, so you actually did listen to one person, regardless if it's right or wrong. You listen to one person and you follow that hierarchy. But now it's not a hierarchy. It's everyone's like
yeah.
equal in a way, and everyone's just
No, but
yeah.
that's not true. There is definitely a hierarchy. Like the information asymmetry always exists. You can't get rid of it. There are some
But
people who will have more
sorry,
voice than others, and they're just going to
yeah,
augment this voice, like
but
influencers, quote unquote.
yeah, but the like hierarchy's a bit skewed or something like that now in today's time.
I think there's a really interesting point. I think there was more of a hierarchy. You were told what to believe by some very obvious authority figures. There was a more coherent belief structure in the past than there is now. And I think what we've generally seen is a fractionalization of belief structures, but they've emerged on these very binary worldviews. Are you Republican or are you Democrat? And they're coming into these kind of very conflicting, your camp or my camp. Are you on the left or are you on the right? Do you think like this? Do you like that? Are you woke or you're not woke? It seems to have essentially, call it bifurcation. You take one thing and split it into two. I think Web3 has the potential to do that again. Instead of having binary outcomes, are you on this camp or you on that camp? You'll have many camps. And what this means is that you have nuance. You'll have a much more pluralistic narrative rather than two dominant narratives. So yeah, I think that's it's a really interesting question. I think there's Web3 is, and there's no stopping it, going to take us into a more pluralistic discourse. Will that make it harder for a coherent truth to emerge? Almost certainly. But that's why we're working on consensus and sense-making systems here, because we're going to need them. We need to listen to more people.
Just say something to Bob there. I think it's a few things. So, from my perspective, everybody has their own perception of reality. And for example, Nick's colorblind, so his perception of reality and my perception of reality are fundamentally different. And that goes all the way through the spectrum in terms of other senses and just your life experiences growing up. So you naturally perceive certain threats. Like, I don't like snakes. I'm immediately like not a fan of them, but other people can just handle them because their perception of snakes and their reality around snakes is a positive one. Mine is a largely negative one. So you've got your own reality anyway. And like with social leaders, so there's this breakdown. So I've been reading a lot about like ancient Greeks and like Aristotle and Plato, and there's like a war going on right now. It's been going on forever of Aristotelian thinking and Platonic thinking. And Plato is all about the philosopher king, right? There's a leader to follow, and that kind of went through Christianity and the church, and that was a big part of people's lives for a long time. It dictated a lot of their thoughts, and then the church essentially had been broken down with knowledge, but we still seek those leaders. So this kind of moved into the political realm, and now that's even breaking down as well. So we're seeking those leaders in other places, and that could be a YouTube influencer, or it could be whatever, a frog. So there's all these different threads at play at the moment, and Web3, we spoke about this so many times, could be the harbinger of doom, or it could be the light in the cave. Like, it really just, it depends on who builds what and why.
I think we're seeing this effect already, where we're engaging with influencers for Shibaku, and we've had users say to us, look, I only buy things that my favorite influencers tell me are good. People like this gatekeeping because it minimizes complexity. So there's a cognitive phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. And it's the feeling of the uncomfortable feeling of not understanding a complex thing. This is too weird and different for me to understand, and I don't like it. And what people do, these kind of, since we've now lost this, we're now in a secular society. It used to believe just trust in God, and then it potentially sort of transitioned to let's trust in the king or the queen, trust in the monarchy, trust in government, and now it's I trust Kim Kardashian. Right, that's where we're at now. And I think what Web3 might do is, and this is where it gets into the sort of thesis of this piece, is that you find a tribe, and I trust what my tribe I associate believes. I'm involved in deciding what we believe. So instead of I'm looking for this archetype, this figure to tell me what to think, I'm going to figure out what we think together. So this kind of Web2 era was about networks. So Chris Dixon's here saying, come for the tools, stay for the network. So I come to Facebook to share what I'm having for breakfast, but I'm staying because I'm fed information from Facebook, from other people's feeds, from adverts and chosen content, algorithmically chosen content. And that's how they've made their money. They basically, you come in to tell everyone you've just seen something interesting on the street, and you end up for half an hour later just consuming what other people have seen on the street, as well as what's the trending news topic and all this sort of stuff. And this is, I didn't even know what this word means, tendies. I've seen come up in memes, but it means profits. I'm coming for the money, staying for the tribe. This is a really insightful nuance to what this is. I think Web3 is implicitly crypto asset based. So you come in because you bought this token because you think it's going to go up in price. And then we end up sitting having philosophical debates in a Discord channel instead. It's like I came in to see if I can make some money, but we end up debating reality and figuring out and forming community. And that's where I think DAOs are going to be I think the thing with this thing that I thought was missing is the omission of DAOs from this narrative, which is talks about Web3 broadly, but I think DAOs are where the tribes are formed. We were actually launching a DAO called Tribes DAO. So yeah, I did largely agree with this to the point where I've thought this for a long time. What we are in is a series of slightly decentralized and overlapping tribes. And the sort of philosophy of Tribes DAO is that, like, okay, what do the Dogecoiners think? What do the Ethereans think? What do the Bitcoiners think? Can we reach consensus on what we all think? What do we think as a space? So yeah, I think there's this kind of, and it kind of talks about the GameStop thing. I think there was a power that people have realized that, okay, we're living in this subreddit, we can take on these guys. And the power of community is something that is part of the Web3 awakening. It's almost like a revisiting of the power of community. I think for many years, we've lost that sense of community for a range of reasons, mainly due to that desecularization or secularization of society. You used to know your community because you all went to church. And now our community are people we hang around with on the internet. So I think community has and always will be a powerful thing.
Yeah, and then they closed all the pubs, and then it's completely...
Yeah, now it's illegal to go to the pub. So you can't even go to the pub. So now you're completely in your house on your own.
It was a great
you've got no
equalizer
community
in
or
a way.
support.
You would end up talking to someone who thinks a bit differently, even though there are also pubs that certain people don't go, but it was an equalizer.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things going on with Web3. One is this implicit function of community and the alignment of community via a shared thing. We all feel the pain when crypto crashes. If the market goes down by 30% in a day, like it did this week, everyone's in the same boat. And that is part of the phenomenon, that there is a collectivization of emotion, collectivization of experience that arises through simply holding the same token. And there's also this notion of shared ownership. So what we're doing with our bank distribution, and we'll do every quarter for years, is distribute our network assets to people who help build the DAO. So we've built a distribution mechanism that tries to, as fairly as possible, distribute the network assets to everyone who builds it. It's not like there isn't a centralized group of people who are building this. We are building this. And the amount of effort you put into building it with us will, as far as we can get, be proportional to how many tokens of that network you get. So this notion of the builders and the users becomes a kind of shared, it's different to Web 2. Facebook hires, like I heard they hire like 500,000 people, or maybe even 1 million people around the world, but they're within a closed organization that you can't see inside. Whereas in Web 3, you can sit in and talk to us every day if you want. We live in here. We build out in the open. You can build with us. You can help design the technology. You can add a new dApp to our dApp suite. So it's totally changed the dynamic. And I think it's as much about a power shift and a process and practice shift than it is a technological shift.
But it's almost gobbled up this open source dynamic, but in a much social, like it cannot be proprietary, even though it's a lot about ownership. It's also,
I think it's about alignment. I think it's one of the things that this tribes thing it's getting at here is that we are aligned via this. We might have some stoner cats here. The stoner cats are aligned via the concept of stoner cats because they own the NFT together. That's the unifying substrate to that engagement, to that community. So and it's Omi's come up in this quite a lot. And I've been arguing with Ethan about whether this is a Ponzi scheme or not, and I have my sort of frame of reference on it. But what's super interesting about Omi's is they managed to create a tribe that is incredibly unified. And that's one of the reasons why it did so well. It talks about 3-3 here in this being a kind of shared paradigm that everyone's in on. We're not selling our tokens because we're all in it together. And that in it together tribal nature was generated by the fact that once you're in, you're getting access to the money printer. You buy 10 ohm, you get 7,000 once you've staked them. Everyone on the outside is different to you. We are in this together, all sitting on this money printer. Our job together is to get more people. Let's go and find more people because we need more people to keep buying this token, otherwise the game ends. Which is basically the same with all of these.
I just want to throw an idea here. No, nothing else. This reminds me a lot about the Rajniparam, the ashram in America, where people were working together and also looking to get more people involved. So I just state this and I won't comment on it.
Yeah.
like they also had this crazy leader and it was a bit creepy, to be honest.
In retrospect,
It's a cult. So in the cult, what I wanted to say, I didn't mean to interrupt, what I wanted to say that people getting more people into the ecosystem, like there is also like a little bit of Ponzinomics in there. So there could be a centralized cult that does exactly the same. They just recruit more people. Or it can be a Ponzi that just recruit more people. Or it can be a community that actually creates value. So the sort of the dynamic of recruiting more people, it's almost like it can be applied to something like maybe a bit creepy or something just which is completely okay.
Yeah, it's again fundamental psychology. There's in-group, out-group dynamics. So in-group, I like the people in my group, and you might be bonded by a physical trait. hey, I'm all in my group because we're all the same race or whatever. And I don't like that group because they're not the same as us. It's a fundamental human psychological trait. And Web3 creates in-group, out-group dynamics that can be really positive and it can be really toxic. So the in-group could be, okay, let's all con some more idiots to come and buy this token of us so we can dump on them. And there is many of these, certainly the own forks fall into that group to me. There's a group of insiders that get super high inflation for a period of time. And then the goal is to go and recruit some more sort of plebs to come and buy the tokens so we can dump on them. That is happening in all, like, I would say 2/3 of the own forks at least. And there is a sort of dynamic where and it does come down to, is there any utility scheme, right? We've got a money printer and it's emitting tokens to us. But does the token do anything? Is there an outcome to this? Is there an end game? Is there a function, purpose? There's no purpose, it's a Ponzi scheme. So I don't want to get lost in Olympus DAO too much, but it is a super interesting, I think you said it earlier, interesting study point for understanding DAOs and understanding this phenomenon.
Yeah, and also, like, for instance, if everyone knows it's a Ponzi and everyone enters anyway, then fair enough. It's just a game of chairs, right? If someone like in the game knows that where the music stops exactly, and then other people don't, then it's a different story, right? It's a casino. Like, some people I know are super against casinos, and it's like, yeah, you go to a casino, it's not, you know, what are you getting into.
Yeah, and casinos are fair. If you play roulette, it's as fair as you can get, unless it's a rigged casino. But it's a fair game. It's rigged towards the house, but it's still fair. It's rigged towards the house, right? The green bucket on a roulette wheel is the house advantage. Over a long enough time, you run that roulette wheel a million times. And to a certain degree, things like Olympus DAO, I call them public asymmetric games. There are people in there who have an asymmetry and a knowledge advantage, a game advantage against other people because they understand the rules of the game better. They can read smart contract code. They understand the kind of fairly abstract economics that's going on better than the sort of normie that's just bought 10 ohm and doesn't know what to do with it. So people like these asymmetric games, but it's public. The rules of the game are open source, whatever happens. So
lovingly,
it's the best way I can describe it is a public asymmetric game. It's an open source game that you will lose if you don't know what you're doing. And you will win if you get in early enough and know what you're doing. And that's just the nature of what it is. There's no arguing with that as far as I'm concerned.
And when you win, you always will win at the expense of others. There is no win-win in the game.
And this is you can boil down my sort of slight beef with Olympus DAO to that. It's that it's portrayed as a collaborative game when it's not. It's a non-collaborative game. It's zero sum. There is ultimately some people who are going to win, some people who are going to lose. It's not 3-3 actually. 3-3 is a collaborative Nashi. So Bitcoin is a 3-3 game because you only can collaborate because it doesn't make any financial sense to not collaborate. You can't win if you try and do something that doesn't want you to do. But Olympus DAO is absolutely not a collaborative Nash equilibrium. You can just sell your tokens at any time. There's a dozen people in there who can kill the game.
Again, another idea that I want to throw out in the table. Have you ever seen the recruitment tactics on forks? What new members have to do and go through in order to get an allocation or a role?
I've seen some of them, yes, but not. I don't have the time to go diving into own forks. Is there a kind of, give us the high level? What kind of tactics are used?
They use tactics, high engagement, high member recruitment. Actually, they look a lot like tactics that in the past were described as cult recruitment tactics.
Yes.
And I'm just stating this as a possible danger on the tribesification of Web3 that we have started to comment on based on this article.
Yeah,
So maybe
I agree.
someone is gaining money, but someone who is depressed and alone gains a sense of purpose and the community and pays for this with his own money.
Yeah, I agree. So there is, I think it's actually in our white paper. You can say the most successful crypto networks are cults with coins. And there is a cult dynamic to this. Not all cults necessarily are bad. And I think again, it comes down to this kind of like, we are going to see this is already happening. There's already very tangible cult-like things that are huge on the internet. Millions of people are part of cult-like behavior who have this, like, I was been arguing with the furries on Twitter recently. They're as close to as a cult as you can get, really. And they've somehow reached the opinion as a group that NFTs are bad. Very strong consensus in group, out group behavior. And recruitment tactics are necessary. We're using quite a bit of them in Shiba. Invite your friends, level up by behaving like this. So the lines between mechanism design and cult recruitment tactics are quite blurry. So yeah, I thought this was quite an interesting meme. So yeah, it swaps startups with tokens. This is about the gamification of information, and Web3 is about the gamification of finance. So what we're talking about there, these recruitment tactics and all that sort of stuff, and it's the gamification of finance. It's a game. Perhaps all finance has always been a game. It's just a game that we've not been allowed in on, and now we are. I think this kind of data means money and let's create new money I call it open source money printing. And the money printers have historically, until Bitcoin, been only within the purview of nation states, and now anyone can create their own.
I can also comment that people having access to stocks and options trading usually belong to clubs, golf clubs or high society clubs. So this is not a new thing. It also existed in the past, but it was more exclusive than allowed less participants, and also due to social and racial things.
So I'd never looked at markets. Now fascinate me. I'm fascinated with markets, market dynamics, markets generally, but I never looked at them until crypto, because I needed to be an accredited investor in order to buy stocks. And all of a sudden I can go to an exchange and get exposure to markets. And that's a very democratizing thing. The result is $30 billion dog tokens. This is what happens when you open up the gates and let everyone in. So I think there's definitely, I think that this kind of phenomenon of Web 2 being about information, Web 3 being about assets is a kind of hook that I've agreed with. Trying to find the thing I disagreed with, and there was definitely something. Yeah, so this talks about online tribes emerge around two types of money. Independent money with horizontal relevance, Ohm, Solana, Ethereum representing a financial graph. So yeah, there's graph theory. And then context-dependent money, aka NFTs. I agree with that. We're going to be focusing very heavily on TDAOs, because we can unify not just by purely asset price, but by concept. So our Shibaku project, we're aligning through this digital art. This is going to be a club that we're negotiating this thing. It's not necessarily all about price, which is the case of pure assets like Bitcoin. And it adds this status dynamic in it. There's rarities. Our Shibakus are like a societal structure where there's kings and queens and wizards, and then there's common shibs, because it's non-fungible. So I think there's I would call these, I would say, I suppose you could say context independent, because they're fungible. But yeah, I think this kind of introduction of a social dynamic is going to be absolutely huge. Thought this was interesting. I hadn't seen this, that there's someone codifying intellectual property with NFTs. I think this thing as turning speculators into users is an interesting dynamic. Yeah, tribe management tools is, I guess you could say, what we're doing at FVT. I thought this graph was interesting. Tribes are emerging as microeconomies aligned by governance tokens. And I think this is a kind of like this rent seeking and value adding dimension. Entrepreneurialism, so we're in this do stuff. We're following an enterprise. Yeah, I quite like this. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
On this chart, but it's like the dynamic between the potential for Web3, and it's how we're going to be able to, rather than being out of control of our data and who we are, our web presence, we'll have control over that potentially, and we'll be able to make a income via our data that we choose to share and that we choose not to share. Depending on that, the ability for corporations to rent seek and for politicians to rent seek is going to be dramatically reduced over time, because they're not going to have that sort of like the permissions over your data. You'll have that and your actions.
I think this phrase rings true to me. The new concept in digital self-determination.
Yeah.
It's that instead of being, and this comes with downsides, you are in crypto, you are on your own to a certain degree. No one's going to look after you. If you lose your keys, they're gone. And that comes with risks. And there's as much downside as there is upside. That's the sort of nature of it. Yeah, so I thought this was interesting. I've got to the end and not found the bit that I disagreed with, which is unusual. Is anything we've not talked about, or any features of this that we've not talked about that anyone likes to bring up and talk about?
I think the article, what came to mind was how this book, Finite versus Infinite Games, and how the goal of a finite game is to come to an agreement that all participants agree on who the winner is, and the goal of an infinite game is to keep playing. And I started thinking about how the economy is like a game, and it's supposed to be an infinite game in that the goal of the economy is that things continue to function. Whereas I see like the finance sector, like the financialization of the economy as a sort of infinite game, but rules that make it like a finite game, because it has rules. Like finance has rules that players in the game can't choose, like banks, for example, or central banks and how do you do it, like monetary policies, or banks, or all these like big corporations. Like the economy is supposed to be something where everyone is involved, and it's supposed to be like an infinite game. And the rule of an infinite game is that all players should be able to play. But with the rules that these corporations and large organizations are making is that excluding certain people from being able to like participate. So basically, they're like disrupting the game. And I see crypto, or rather, what I read from the article is that crypto is a way of, well, I say resetting the game. So people who are now like participant in the game can basically change the rules. Yeah, basically change back the rules.
I agree. I love that framing of finite and infinite games. It's based on a book, Finite and Infinite Games, by a guy called James Carse. He died last year, sadly. I have a PDF of this somewhere.
I read it. I read it from
It's brilliant, man. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So a finite game is one which ends with a winner, with an outcome. So a game of chess, a finite game. Someone wins, someone loses, or it's stalemate, but there is an outcome. And the goal is to win. An infinite game, the goal is to keep playing. Now, this tribal aspect is, we like our tribe. We like hanging out and doing this, and we want this to continue. It's fun. We like it. That's the motivation to make it. Is that we just want this to continue forever. We want as a community for the game to continue. So that motivation. Whereas I think there's like implicit in more what are called zero sum games, which is someone has to lose. Markets are zero sum. If you're buying an asset and winning and you go up, it's because you bought it off someone a lot. You're buying it from someone who's a counterpart. So non-zero sum games are one in which everyone wins. So this like meme of we're all going to make it is almost like a kind of, we're all recognizing that what we're trying to do here is a non-zero sum game. Because in a non-zero sum game, we all win. And that is possible with value creation. The only way that happens is if we all collaborate and do something, and value is created and everyone wins. And I think that's the nature of an infinite game, is that everyone keeps winning. And it's not always up only, but the goal of the game is to make it sustainable in the long term. And many token systems, and but it crosses over with token economics, is the game able to be, so you will have seen many of these hyperinflating yield farming games. They last 2 weeks. They smash all their tokens out, an incredible inflation rate. And then the game ends because now it's a dump race after 4 or 5 or 6 days. They're not sustainable. So sustainability is an implicit nature of an infinite game. So to your point there, Lenny, about is traditional finance infinite game. I don't think it is, because in the current state, all we do is completely bleed the world of resources and everyone dies. We're on this exponential upshoot where there's nothing left to use. It's just all being consumed till it's gone. Whereas an infinite game is a sustainable one. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I think is there an overshoot thing? Yeah. So this happens in all sorts of systems. So nothing can go up only, because there's necessarily a finite amount of resources. How this changes with digital stuff is a different thing. So we can make an infinite amount of metaverse land, but in conventional real world ecologies, there is a finite amount of resources that can be taken out of them. And we are in danger, if we aren't already in this phase, of overshooting what is available, and what you end up with population crash, a really bad crash. If you overshoot, all sustainable growth is S-curve growth. There's no such thing as up only forever. And what happens is when you overshoot, you get a correction and you have this kind of like crash up. But yeah, there's so much about our contemporary approach to finance and economics that is predicated on the idea of this is going to carry on forever, and it just won't. So I think just wrap up here. I think we're at a point in time where people like semantic tags, people like buckets to name things, and Web3 might become the kind of thing. Okay, this is the new paradigm. This is the new digital revolution. I think the metaverse as an idea is another tag that we're hanging on to. Is that, okay, there's going to be a digital future and it's going to be purely digital. We're uncoupled from the boundaries of reality, and new games are going to emerge on this thing. And you'll be able to live in the metaverse if you want, and spend a lot of your time there and work in there and play in there. And there's no two ways about it. We're getting into this era of technological development. It's not even about Web3. It's everything. It's machine learning. It's robotics. It's AI. It's Web3. It's everything. We're in an era of disruptive innovation, and a lot of that is arising because of open source technologies, because of access. There are people in India who've never had access to huge amounts of resources, who are creating their own cryptocurrencies and the amount of people who can win in the game is increasing. So yeah, I think it's genuinely interesting time, but it is going to create a conflict between the old guard and the new. This has always happened throughout history. The Luddites were against the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution. People don't like change, but it's happening one way or another. There's not much you can do about it. So all you can do is become prepared for it, in a sense, and learn about what's about to happen, and ideally get involved in it, because and there's no things don't happen smoothly. It happens. Disruptive innovation happens punctuated sense. You'll get a lot of change and then not much change, and then a lot of change and not much change, or a regression to the mean. So yeah, it's going to be pretty wild time, I think, but there's going to be a lot of people trying to understand what's going on, and a lot of people rejecting it. You could tag those people as boomers, whether they're kids or old or what. But yeah, I've got about 5 or 6 minutes before I need to run into our next call. If anyone's got any other thoughts or comments. Stop sharing my screen. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I read that this morning, and yeah, unusually for things that we've read in here, I agreed with most of it. There was one thing that I had my scan there. So I thought, well, I'm sure I agree with that, but largely I was on board with it all. I think something like this happens like once every few generations. Yeah, it depends on, so you have periodic paradigm, and then you have like epoch changing events, which is like the Stone Age to the Iron Age, which is truly epoch changing. That the entire context is civilizationally different than the previous one. So is this are we going through this transitory era into the information age, or the digital age, as you call it. And I think largely, if you zoom out to all of it, is that moment of just we're moving into a digital era. Digitization, sometimes called digital transformation. It makes sense that everything will transition. Everything that can be digitized will, and cryptography is just one of the tools that allows that to happen. Now, what happens when that does happen is people respond to the new tools that are available. And one of the things that we will do is congregate in groups online and do stuff and collaborate in ways that we never have. So that to me is ultimately very exciting. Will it all be brilliant? Will there be communities that end up as toxic, negative places? Absolutely. Will people collaborate on horrible stuff? They already do. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not going to be all good. And there will be a relentless, I keep expecting this moment of extreme moral panic when it comes to this stuff, where I'm expected as a creator in this space, and those of you who also do that, and you need to be prepared for this, will be vilified and by people who don't want it to change, and they will pick out negative externalities that arise from this and blame it on those people. There was a guy who, one of these anti-NFT dudes, and said NFTs are for the worst people in the world. So yeah, that's us. We're the worst people in the world. To that guy, there's going to be people who perceive us to be monsters because we are bringing about.
Morality is the last resort of power plays.
The last resort
of power play.
Yeah, to revert to simple, essentially ad hominem attacks.
But there will be also power plays disguised as nice new NFT shit, extreme surveillance, and all kind of mind manipulation crap. So there will be super bad things as well.
Yeah, like that WorldCoin thing is a monstrous invention. Web3 we talk about this practically every week, normally in this session, but there is two ways to take this technology. One is to an extremely dystopian outcome, which is ultra surveillance and essentially hugely centralized top-down control. And then there's a more utopian direction, which is about community and non-zero sum games and collaboration and inclusivity and all sorts of exciting new productive technologies that could be hugely value additive for civilization. And people will run at both paths simultaneously. I consider nation states taking the CBDC, the central bank digital currency route, as potentially down that dystopian route. So there will be powerful people taking the wrong path. So I think one of the things we're going to have to do is we need to make sure we are a tribe that is on the good as far as possible.
Yeah, I think, like, to your point, I think Uncle Pete in Spider-Man says it best: when absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the more sort of centralized, what's the word I'm searching for, authority, because what is a government? A government is, it's violence. It's like authorized violence, and money is like financial violence when applied. A CBDC is like probably the worst possible outcome for all of that, because you're going to centralize all this power within a very small group of people. And that's, like I say, it's our job to give other options, basically, and allow people to express themselves in different ways. Sorry, go ahead.
There is another thing. Yes, sorry. There is a lag, actually, so I'm not intentionally talking over you because you asked me not to. It's super hard to edit. So I wanted to say also, like, some tribes will just go completely insanely evil. But what I think is super important with decentralization, where you can actually have freedom to leave your tribe and join another one because you think something went wrong. So you're not completely indoctrinated by your tribe either. And I think what's happening with like centralized social media, it's when there are these tribes also appearing on like Facebook groups and whatever, but in a way it's constructed, it's super hard to leave and actually join anything else. So anyway.
Yeah. And I think that ability to, one of the things that you can be a member of many tribes. I think that's a huge thing that is the case with the permissible networks. You can be in 7 DAOs. If you don't like the way one is going, you can leave whenever you want and go to a different
that's
one.
hopefully can create more social coherence. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.